Kingdom of Heaven, movie verse history. The movie Kingdom of Heaven tells the story of how a simple blacksmith became a hero during the siege of Jerusalem. However, as is often the case with historical Hollywood dramas, reality and fiction tend to blend, mainly for artistic effect and at the cost of historical accuracy. While Ridley Scott offers a fascinating vision of the Crusader era and a cinematic spectacle, it's important to realize that many events and characters are heavily romanticized, altered for dramatic purposes, or entirely fictional. Sit back and join us as we explore the differences between the film Kingdom of Heaven and the actual history, as told by historians. Let's begin with one of the biggest differences between Kingdom of Heaven and historical fact. None other than the film's central character, Balian, the humble blacksmith from a French village. In the film, Balian's wife commits suicide out of grief for their deceased child. In his rage, Balian kills a priest who had taken a necklace from her corpse and ordered her body be burned and decapitated. To atone for his sin and save his soul, Balian sets off for Jerusalem, the one place where he might find redemption. None of this ever happened. The only things the film Balian shares with the historical Balian are his name, fame, and the fact that he defended Jerusalem and later handed it over to Saladin. The real Balian wasn't born in France, but in Ibelin, one of the Crusader fiefdoms in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He was not the illegitimate son of a knight named Godfrey of Ibelin, but the youngest son of Balian of Ibelin, with two brothers, Hugh and Baldwin. After the deaths of their father and oldest brother Hugh, the castle of Ibelin passed to Baldwin. Baldwin later chose to rule over Ramla instead and gave Ibelin to Balian, making him his vassal. Balian's wife was not a common woman who took her own life. She was Maria Comnena, a former queen of Jerusalem and widow of King Amalric. No historical sources suggest that Balian needed to seek redemption in Jerusalem, especially since he was already living there. He was known to be deeply religious, attending every mass and religious festival, even while on military campaigns. He once reportedly spent an entire night in spiritual conversation with a bishop. There's also debate over his appearance. In Kingdom of Heaven, Balian is played by 28-year-old Orlando Bloom, who, despite the beard and dark hair, still resembles an elf from The Lord of the Rings more than a Crusader knight. The historical Balian was 44 years old at the time of the 1187 siege of Jerusalem and described as unusually tall, strong, and very hairy. In the movie, Princess Sibylla is married to the French knight Guy of Lusignan, but in an unhappy marriage. She falls in love with Balian and has an affair with him. King Baldwin IV, who also dislikes Guy, devises a plan to have him killed so that Balian could marry Sibylla and become king of Jerusalem. In reality, Balian never had an affair with Sibylla, and since he was married to her stepmother, it would have been nearly impossible. They also didn't have much personal contact, making a romantic spark highly unlikely. The movie's ending, where Sibylla gives up the throne and returns to Europe to live with Balian as simple peasants, feels more like a Disney fairy tale than historical epic, and is completely fictional. In truth, it was Balian's brother who showed romantic interest in Sibylla. Unfortunately for him, Sibylla actually loved Guy. Her first marriage to William Longsword of Montferrat ended tragically when he died a year after the wedding, leaving her pregnant. As her brother King Baldwin IV suffered from leprosy and Sibylla was his heir, he arranged for her a second marriage, to Guy of Lusignan. Guy, being ambitious, persuaded Baldwin to appoint him regent in early 1182. However, after Guy provoked conflict with Saladin and failed to lead successfully during the siege of Kerak in present-day Jordan, Baldwin changed the line of succession, naming Sibylla's son, Baldwin V, as heir over both Sibylla and her sister, Isabella. Baldwin V was crowned co-king in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on November 20th, 1183. Baldwin IV also tried to annul his sister's marriage to Guy, but Sibylla refused, most likely because she truly loved her husband. When Baldwin IV died in 1885, he had appointed Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, as regent for Baldwin V. The child king died the following year, and Sibylla became the rightful heir. Raymond and his supporters tried to place her sister Isabella on the throne instead, but Sibylla marched with her army to Jerusalem and seized the city. Jerusalem was hers. But before her coronation, she had to promise her supporters she would annul her marriage to Guy and choose a new husband. Sibylla agreed on the condition that she could pick the man herself. And she did exactly that. She divorced Guy, had herself crowned queen, and then married him again, naming him king and outsmarting everyone. After the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Sibylla pleaded with Saladin to release Guy, who had been captured at the Battle of Hattin in 1887. They fled together to Tyre, and later, while Guy was besieging Acre, Sibylla and her daughters Alex and Maria died of fever during an epidemic in the Crusader camp. Kingdom of Heaven was filmed in Spain and Morocco, making Jerusalem appear as a city built in the middle of a desert. There are no trees, bushes, or even patches of grass, only endless sand and dunes. But anyone who's ever visited the Mount of Olives or the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem knows there's plenty of greenery, shrubs, and trees. Moreover, the terrain around Jerusalem is not flat and ideal for building siege weapons. It's full of valleys, ditches, and uneven ground. Although Balian is portrayed as a simple blacksmith trained in France, just days after arriving in the Kingdom of Heaven, which he visits for the first time, he becomes an expert in virtually everything. Thanks to him, the people quickly learn how to farm properly, dig wells in the desert, and, later on, Balian somehow becomes a master of military strategy, fully knowledgeable about siege machinery. Not to mention, he's one of the few survivors of an ambush in a French forest, where many seasoned warriors die. Sure, during big sports tournaments we all become armchair experts and coaches, and during elections we suddenly become political tacticians. But unlike Balian, most of us don't have entire nations actually listening to us. The idea that a village blacksmith could so easily excel in so many areas is, upon reflection, rather laughable. That said, we have to give credit where it's due. In the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, it is at least explained that Balian used to be a soldier in the cavalry and later worked with siege equipment, so he may have had some training. As for his farming skills, let's just say he had a natural gift. By the way, that director's cut, extended by several dozen minutes, explains quite a bit that the theatrical version lacks. While Kingdom of Heaven is still a solid historical film in its original cut, Ridley Scott's director's version adds valuable depth to the story and is highly recommended. In the movie, Balian is portrayed as a noble and brave man trying to save the kingdom from power-hungry factions, caring mainly for the well-being of the common people. In reality, Balian was also keen on improving his own status and political influence at the expense of rivals, and actively took part in internal power struggles. In a way, one could argue that the real Balian would have been the enemy of the movie Balian, because his actions contributed to the internal weakening of Jerusalem. In Kingdom of Heaven, Balian orders the burning of fallen soldiers' bodies during the siege of Jerusalem to prevent the spread of disease. In reality, as a devout Christian, he would never have suggested such a thing, let alone questioned whether his God was good or not. As mentioned earlier, the real Balian was very religious. Like all crusaders, he would have insisted on proper Christian burials for the dead. Cremation was practiced by Vikings, Greeks, or Hindus, but never by Christians, who strictly buried their dead in the ground. Despite the film's depiction of Balian and Guy as bitter enemies, their historical relationship was far more complex. They were sometimes allies and sometimes rivals, depending on political circumstances. In the movie, the two men fight in a dramatic duel, with Balian easily defeating Guy and sparing his life, telling him to rise a knight. In truth, no historical records mention any duel between Balian and Guy. Tiberius, a loyal follower of the king who seeks to preserve peace, is a fictional character in Kingdom of Heaven. He has no historical equivalent. However, he is loosely based on Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, a skilled politician who served twice as regent, first under Baldwin IV and later under Baldwin V. In the film, Tiberius does not participate in the Battle of Hattin and instead departs for Cyprus. In reality, Raymond fought at Hattin and was one of the few who escaped. He survived, but died later that year from tracheitis. In Kingdom of Heaven, many of the Crusaders are portrayed as villains committing violence in the name of Christianity, such as Guy of Lusignan and his sidekick Reynald, whose hatred of Muslims makes them the film's chief antagonists. However, during that era, violence committed in God's name was seen as just and righteous, and the people of the time likely would not have been shocked or morally troubled by such actions. This villainization of certain characters is more a concession to modern viewers than historical realism. According to surviving records, there is no evidence that King Baldwin IV wore a mask, as seen in Kingdom of Heaven, and certainly not one as stylish and elegant as the one worn by actor Edward Norton. The French chronicler William of Tyre, who lived in Jerusalem during Baldwin's reign, described that the king used a veil or a hood to cover his face in public so as not to frighten or disgust his subjects. Another chronicler, Roger of Hoveden, confirmed that Baldwin used to wear a veil as well. However, some modern historians argue that there's no physical evidence or trustworthy documentation that Baldwin wore a veil or mask, especially considering that his advanced leprosy would have made such accessories difficult to wear. According to some interpretations, Baldwin wore his scars with pride, showing strength and confidence despite his illness. He made no effort to hide his disease, asserting his faith in God and proving that he was not cursed in his eyes. Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, also known as the Leper King, ruled the Kingdom of Jerusalem from 1174 until his death in 1185. The first signs of the disease appeared in childhood, when his caretaker noticed that Baldwin didn't cry when other children pinched him, because he couldn't feel pain in his right arm. In Kingdom of Heaven, it is Godfrey of Ibelin, father of the film Balian, who notices Baldwin's lack of pain sensitivity. Baldwin was diagnosed with leprosy after ascending the throne following the death of his father, King Amalric. The disease progressed quickly, disfiguring his hands and face. Since he became king at the age of 13, Raymond III of Tripoli ruled in his name until Baldwin reached adulthood in 1176. It remains unclear how Baldwin contracted the disease, but it must have been from someone he spent a lot of time with who showed no visible symptoms. Despite common practice, Baldwin did not live isolated from others, though it was assumed he would never marry or have children. Upon taking the throne, he planned an invasion of Egypt, but due to the unreliability of his vassals, the campaign failed. In retaliation, Saladin attacked his kingdom the following year, but Baldwin and Reynald of Châtillon defeated him at the Battle of Montgisard, gaining the young king lasting fame. Even as the disease progressed, Baldwin continued to ride horses and fight in battles. By 1183, he could no longer walk unaided or use his hands. He eventually lost the ability to blink, causing his corneas to dry out and go blind. Baldwin died in 1185. His successor, Baldwin V, Sibylla's son, died just a year later, possibly of the same illness as his uncle. Director Ridley Scott originally planned to make a biographical film about Saladin, but after 9/11, he changed course and focused on Balian of Ibelin. As a result, Kingdom of Heaven portrays religious violence as the ultimate evil, casting both Muslims and Crusaders as villains unless they seek peace or oppose senseless holy wars. In the film, Saladin is portrayed as an honorable and just ruler, full of mercy. In reality, Saladin was respected by both Muslims and Christians for his generosity, but he could also be ruthless. He became a hero of the Islamic world by uniting Muslim kingdoms to fight against the Crusaders. His dream was to reclaim Jerusalem and restore Islamic control over the Holy Land. The film omits that Saladin demanded ransom for the residents of Jerusalem after its surrender, likely to present him as more generous and smooth the film's ending. Saladin initially offered fair terms if the city surrendered peacefully, but when the defenders vowed to fight to the death, he revoked the offer for the French population of Jerusalem. In response, Balian threatened to kill all Muslim hostages, up to 5,000 people, and destroy the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. After consulting his council, Saladin agreed to new terms. A very low ransom was demanded per French resident, man, woman, or child. Against his treasurer's advice, Saladin allowed many families to leave freely, but those who couldn't pay were enslaved. After the 1187th Battle of Hattin in the film, Saladin offers a cup of ice water to the captured Guy of Lusignan as a gesture of Muslim hospitality. Guy passes it to his companion Reynald of Châtillon, who drinks it eagerly. Saladin then says the drink was not intended for Reynald and executes him. Reynald is portrayed quite accurately as a cruel knight who raided Saracen caravans and made many enemies. According to some accounts, he was executed not for drinking, but because he refused the drink from Saladin. In Arab tradition, sharing water with a prisoner meant granting mercy. Reynald declared he would never eat or drink anything that came from Saladin. Enraged, Saladin asked what Reynald would do if a prisoner showed him the same disrespect. Reynald replied, "I would kill him." So Saladin did just that. According to Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani, Saladin's advisor, the event went slightly differently. Saladin invited Guy and Reynald into his tent and recounted Reynald's crimes, broken oaths, and treaties he had betrayed. Reynald replied via a translator that this was normal behavior for kings and he had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, Guy was nearly fainting from thirst, so Saladin offered him iced water. Guy then passed it to Reynald, and Saladin pointed out that Guy had not asked permission to share it, so he was not bound to spare Reynald's life. After riding out to inspect his troops, Saladin returned, had Reynald brought before him, and beheaded him in a single stroke. To Guy, he then said in a calming voice that Reynald was killed for his treachery, not for the drink. Although in the movie Kingdom of Heaven, Godfrey knights Balian shortly before his death, such a thing would not have been legally possible in reality. Knighthood for an illegitimate son was not legally permitted in the Middle Ages without a specific exemption from the monarch or the Catholic Church. And as for the mass knighting during the siege of Jerusalem, we'd rather not even start on that. And that's all for today's overview of the differences between Kingdom of Heaven and the historical reality as recorded by historians. It doesn't diminish the film in our eyes. Kingdom of Heaven remains one of our favorite historical movies. How much do you like it? What do you think of the differences? Let us know in the comments.